Welcome to the Firefly Tutors TV podcast, where real teachers from all over the country discuss real solutions for parents and educators alike. Here's your host, Marissa Johnston.
Hello and welcome to The Buzz, brought to you by Firefly Tutors TV, where we talk to administrators, educators, and parents all across the country about current topics affecting school children today. In this episode of Firefly Tutors The Buzz podcast, we delve into the fascinating world of dyslexia and ADHD, examining its profound impact on the social, emotional well-being and career aspirations of adolescents. Join us as we welcome Dr. Benjamin Powers, a renowned expert in the field who shares his insights, experiences, and strategies to help young individuals overcome these challenges and unlock their full potential. Discover how understanding and addressing these learning differences can empower adolescents, equip them with essential skills, and inspire them to shape their own path to success. Benjamin Powers is the executive director at the Southport School and is a practitioner, researcher, and advocate who integrates research and practice to benefit children and adults with reading and attention difficulties. Dr. Powers, welcome to The Buzz.
Well, Marissa, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here today to share some information, background, and knowledge to help support parents and kids in this journey.
Last year, I think it was in 2022, LinkedIn added dyslexic thinking as a vital skill option on their platform, with companies actively seeking to hire those who exhibit this ability. What can you describe what a dyslexic person does differently in their thinking that makes this such a desirable characteristic among employers?
So this is actually a really interesting question. There's a lot of debate in the field about this. There's this notion of this dyslexic thinking or these dyslexic strengths. And again, it's really important to acknowledge that every individual with dyslexia is different. It's also really important to acknowledge that the research on this is really unclear at this point. And so I can give you a very specific example. If you're familiar with Escher drawings or Escher paintings, this whole notion of impossible figures. This is a study that has been replicated where they asked, typical learners and then dyslexic learners to look at impossible figures and decide whether they were possible or impossible. So like that Escher staircase that actually couldn't exist because it kind of inverts itself.
Right.
Individuals with dyslexia were slightly faster at being able to identify whether a figure was possible or impossible. Okay, very, very slightly at a statistically significant level. So there is, it is statistically validated, but very, very slightly and no more accurately. So they had the same accuracy level. They were just a little bit faster. So, again, I think from an evolutionary perspective, it is likely that there are reasons that people are wired to have things like dyslexia and ADHD. At the same time, I think the research is just really not there yet in terms of validating, whether there are these, dyslexic strengths or these dyslexic differences. What I will tell you, after working with people with dyslexia for so long, both people in school and adults, is that the way I think about dyslexic thinking is that somebody with dyslexia really has to be able to figure out how to navigate around the walls that are created in their day-to-day existence. And so I have worked with individuals, kids, high school kids with dyslexia who were so incredibly smart, but we would get to a restaurant, even a pizza place, and they literally couldn't decode the menu, and they had to rely and use a strategy like waiting to be the last person to order so that they could hear what everybody else ordered and then kind of make a choice from that vantage point.
Right.
To me, that is the beauty of dyslexic thinking. It's the ability to really try to figure out how to navigate around. Unfortunately, this oftentimes takes resiliency. And I think we have to be really careful because we shouldn't be layering on another thing for kids to have to take responsibility for. And, it is hard, or it can be really difficult to develop resiliency. But I will tell you in my experience that a lot of the successful adults I've met with dyslexia or ADHD, that development of resiliency, that ability to problem solve, to come at problems from a different angle, that in and of itself, I think is a huge advantage when you're thinking about employing somebody outside of kind of a rote mechanized task. Now, even in a rote mechanized task, it is likely somebody with dyslexia or ADHD might come at that type of task and think about a way to do it maybe more efficiently or
Sure.
differently. So I think if we start with that understanding as a basis, and then we continue the research to think about, are there actually discriminant differences in something like the dyslexic brain, which I think we'll be able to figure out at some point. There's only a plus side from there. So I think it is absolutely imperative that we think about this and that employers think about these relative areas of strength that somebody with dyslexia or ADHD can bring into their place of employment.
Definitely. And I love what you bring up with kind of almost being solution oriented in that sense of, okay, I have been dealt a problem. And it does kind of go back to what you're saying about it being a hidden disability, that someone may just not want people to know that about them. They may be against labels and stuff. They may not like the way people treat them if they find out. So they're going to do their best to fit in. And they will oftentimes, like you said, do whatever it takes in a sly way to kind of mask that aspect of them. And that does breed a lot of ingenuity, and problem solving. Strength is definitely finding a solution. So that is encouraging to
That's right.
hear.
And I'll just tell you a very quick story. My mentor, Diana King, who passed away a few years ago.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
One of the first students that she worked with down in Washington, D.C., is one of the most famous, if not the most famous, special ed attorneys, Peter Wright,
Wow.
who runs wrightslaw.com with his wife. And I've gotten to know Pete over the years. And, Pete is one of the reasons why kids with learning and attention issues can come to specialized schools or get support from their school districts. And one of the reasons that's the case is because Pete, although he's severely dyslexic, Diana really worked with him over the years and brought him to a place where, he could access the printed word, but Pete is still very dyslexic. However, because he's able to problem solve, because he was able to develop these compensatory techniques, he was able to give an incredible oral argument in the landmark Supreme Court case that got us what's called Carter funding. And so, he's the reason why we have that in place. And it's because of that way that he developed, all of those skills that, put really so many kids and their families in a much better place today with being able to access the right kind of education for their child.
Yes, definitely. Now, kind of going back to the stigma that adolescents can face, those with dyslexia and ADHD may face that stigma or misconceptions in society. How can parents, educators, and peers create an inclusive and supportive environment that celebrates their unique abilities and fosters their self-confidence?
Marissa, that's a great question. I do think one part of being able to help build community around this is really that whole notion of identification. Getting tested, getting that information is really crucial. And I'll tell you a very quick story that was really grounding for me in my own journey with my daughter. When she got tested, she was really struggling with certain aspects of school. She was really struggling with the writing process. And so, when the psychologist had completed the testing and sat down with her, he had an honest conversation with her. He helped her understand, these seem to be the things you're struggling with. Now look at your cognitive profile. Here's why. But then, he was asking, the thing that stands out to me is he was asking her about one specific ability she had and where she thought she was, like on a scale from 0 to 100 relative to her classmates. Mm-hmm. And, he started to draw the line and said, stop me when you think, stop me when you think I've gotten to the place where you are kind of, commensurate with your classmates. Mm-hmm. And so he started to draw this line, and about a little less than halfway, she said, stop. And he said, okay, now I'm going to continue to where you are, because she was so high in that ability area. Yeah. And I think, grounding our kids in really helping them understand, where are those relative areas of strength and where are those deficits, and how can you advocate and be able to communicate very clearly and effectively what your needs are.
Right.
Because I think, Marissa, as a teacher, you would, I hope you would agree with, or maybe you'd agree with this. Imagine if every student could walk into the first day of class and say, hey, I'm Ben. I'm going to work really hard for you. Here are the things I'm good at. Here are the things that I need some help with. Like if we've got a long-term assignment, that's something I really need to break down. For me, that was like my arch nemesis in school. If you gave me like a 30-page research paper,
I was doing it the night before.
That's right. About 2 days before, I was on the phone with my mom saying, can you get me the books, right? Now as a teacher, right, that's a huge opportunity. So I think, again, validating and grounding, what are the areas of strength? What are the areas where somebody might need support? I think that advocacy piece is one of the number one things our students leave here with, is that ability to go into their next school and be clear about that, both the parents and the student themselves. And then I think, and this is something I love to do, I actually just did this at a local school in Madison, Connecticut this past April, is going in and talking with communities of learners, of kids and of adults, and talking about these different profiles, this whole notion of whether you call it neurodiversity or what we call cerebrodiversity, understanding and showing examples of that, and then showing those fMRI images, showing that brain level differences. Time and time again, when we've done those talks or that kind of outreach, teachers come back and say, oh my gosh, like these are things I just did not know. Because I think we're inclined, we've got large classes of kids coming in the typical school. Teachers have a huge load on them. It's not an easy job. Every year it gets harder. There's more responsibility. There's more accountability. There's more to cover in a given year. There's more factors. So I think, by helping educate and sharing that knowledge is just really impactful. And the flip side of that we've seen, at least when we go into communities and share this, is that teachers have come up at the end or afterward and have shared how having that information has helped them come at a student who's struggling differently, and maybe give them the benefit of the doubt, or that kind of support or some structure they need in place to be successful, and how that has started to make a huge difference for them.
Yeah, no, definitely. And what you're saying, what I'm hearing is that educating the masses is important in this sense of giving them that perspective, because it is hard to help students when you don't necessarily understand what it is they're experiencing or going through. I was definitely able to support the kids with dyslexia, ADHD, processing delays, autism, stuff like that, because I kind of understood where they were coming from. And a lot of times I saw in them what I needed when I was a kid, or how I acted or behaved or anything. But teachers who didn't experience that firsthand aren't inherently going to, see a kid struggling and go, oh, they probably just need this accommodation. So, that is such a crucial, vital piece of just educating those who are educating the youth that this is usually oftentimes all they need. They may need a timer on their desk to keep them focused. They may need a little more time, or, the big projects broken down into smaller components. They may need to sit at the front of the classroom. They may need a reading card or a line reader to help them read. A lot of teachers just don't have that, in their education, in their higher ed, stuff like that. And even for homeschooling parents, there may be a lot of them who go, I don't even know where to begin. Where do I find this information?
That's right. Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, one of the challenges in our educational system is that we tend to be reactive.
Yes.
Whereas what we know is going to work better is being proactive. And one of the school systems that's really held in high esteem is the country of Finland. They have an incredible, they've had these incredibly successful PISA results year after year. Yes. Guess what percentage of students in Finland have access special ed at some point in their educational career?
I wouldn't even know which way to go.
It's 50%.
Oh, wow.
50%. And if you think about it, that makes so much sense, because, so many people, you can be maybe you're a gifted writer or really good at things like English language arts, like ELA, but maybe you're struggling with math, not because you're not good at math, but because, you need it taught to you in a different way. If we can be more proactive, if we can identify things earlier, what we do know is that the earlier we intervene, the more success we're going to have. And you see this, there's a huge difference intervening kindergarten versus first grade versus second grade. And, there are people like Dr. Nadine Gabb or Dr. Yakov Petcher who talk a lot about this whole we have this kind of wait to fail model in school, unfortunately. And just by being that proactive, just by helping people understand that, it would make a huge, huge difference.
Yes, absolutely. And that is just mind-blowing to hear that children in Finland have that access to special education. And I'm sure that at that level, it's not the special education that we're used to. It sounds a little bit like remediation, but being tailored to how the child learns, which is often what our special ed teachers do. There's just a negative stigma on it here in the States.
That's exactly right. And I think that's one of the big pieces, is that they don't look at it that way. It's a chance to get,
what
look,
you need.
As a parent, I always love when my kids get extra time with something, like whether it's a coach and they're, saying, hey, I want to work with your child some more, right? I mean, that's a great thing, having that chance to work with kids. It does take resources. It does take training. We can't ignore those realities. It's not to suggest that this is easy. It also means, maybe that student is missing something else, like we talked about earlier. But again, if we can do these things early, then we have, what we do know is that it takes fewer resources to achieve that outcome, to help kids reach that potential, rather than waiting, which takes exponentially more time and money. So the earlier we can do this, not only are we going to help each kid achieve that potential, earlier and with much more success, but we're also going to be able to help a lot more kids.
Yes, certainly. Now, we've already talked about some success stories that have come of those with dyslexia and ADHD, but with all the difficulties that we hear that are associated with these learning disabilities, do you have other inspiring success stories of individuals who have overcome these challenges and gone on to achieve remarkable things in their personal and professional lives?
I'm going to share one of the most touching stories that has impacted me personally. And it was the first year I was working with kids with dyslexia as an Orton Gillingham tutor. I was working with these kids one-on-one. And there was a young man who was going into, he had just started his senior year of high school. He'd had one other year of intervention in his sophomore year, went back to school, was really struggling. And he would come in every day and put his head on the desk and just felt really kind of defeated. Mm-hmm. And my question to him, because this kid was clearly, other things I had seen from this student throughout the day on the sports field, really just a talented individual and smart, clearly smart, but did not feel that way about himself. And I remember asking him, and this was September, October, this is when a lot of kids in their senior year of high school, I mean, kids have already applied to college at this point, or they're already kind of almost at that point of making that decision. And for this individual, college was really not on his radar. And we talked a lot about it, and he just didn't feel like that was his path. And over the course of several months, we finally got to a place where he was willing to entertain that idea. And he went to a small school up in outside of Boston, Curry College. You may have heard of it. At the time, I don't know what the enrollment is like today, but there were about 1,200 kids there at the time, about 1 out of 3 who had learning or attention issues. Mm-hmm. And, I was so excited about that this young man, had made that kind of, that leap of faith and really felt confident enough to do that. And then I didn't really hear from him. Well, it turns out after spending 2 years there, he did a really great job, was able to transfer to a school that was even more competitive. And he came back, I'll never forget, he came back to visit me several years later. And he threw his arms around me and must have said thank you like 25 times. Aww. And today he is a nurse that specializes in supporting patients with cancer. And so he has this phenomenal career. He's helping so many people. And it's not to say that, he wouldn't be doing some other type of incredible work today. But I think, that whole notion of empowering our kids, giving them that chance to take those healthy risks, opening, helping them see those doors of opportunity. Yes. They have to do the heavy lifting. We can't do it for them. No. They have to do that work themselves, and it's not always easy.
No.
But if we can give them if we can help them open that door just a little bit and be able to have those experiences where they can try new things and figure out what it is that's going to make their heartbeat faster, and make them feel like they're really contributing,
Yes.
they can just have really incredible outcomes. And that's just one example. Over the years, over the last 25 years, it's just been absolutely incredible to hear stories and to see kids come back who were on a very different trajectory until they got the right kind of intervention, until they got the right kind of social emotional support, until they could be their own self-advocate.
Yes.
And then just do these absolutely tremendous things, and feel really successful in whatever field it is that they decided to go into.
Oh, wow. That is so heartwarming to hear, because we often hear the negative. We don't always get to hear the positive, and that there are pathways out there for people like us, so that is very encouraging. I have a former student, I just have to shout him out here. I'm not going to drop names or anything, but um, I taught him in fourth and fifth grade. He had dyslexia, and we worked constantly to support, we did a lot of just practice and sight words and all that stuff to help him get where he needed to be. And I was fortunate enough to attend his eighth grade promotion this year, and he made the year-long honor roll list. So this was a child
Wow.
who was getting, unfortunately C's and D's early on, who made it to where he is successful, and then he's on the football team and doing baseball and all this stuff too. So just to see him come from a kid who hated reading, I mean, hated with a passion, to have that much growth and be acing every single one of his academic courses. Just I was bawling in the bleachers, just so proud of where he had come from and where he was today. So while he's not yet doing those amazing, exceptional things out there in the real world, I know he will one day. And
Well, that is, I just want to say, Marissa, that is such a gift.
yes,
And even though he may not be out there doing those, having, achieved like life success yet, the one thing I always take away from those experiences is that, that is literally changing the conversation for these
yeah,
kids, because no matter what, nobody can take that feeling of success, that experience away from him that you
no.
helped him achieve. And so, that builds the opportunity, that roadway for all that future success down the line.
And that's the thing, that's the key that is often missing, is that self-confidence. We talked about self-esteem early on in our episode today, and that self-confidence piece is just vital. If a child thinks that they can't, they won't. So, building them up, letting them know, no, no, there is a way. It's just not the way that everyone else is doing it. We'll get there. That's all they need. And then they're going to run with it, and they're going to do amazing things and accomplish their goals and everything. Um, One of the things that was embedded in me very early on after my diagnosis was, it's not an excuse, it's an explanation. And that was just to, yeah, there are times I call myself on my own ADHD, antics. I'm like, come on, Marissa, focus, but because I know what my struggles are, I also know how to address them. And it gives me that self confidence in myself and knowing, come on, girl, you can do this, get over it, push past.
That's right. You have to own it. And, but you can't own something you don't know you have. Right. And
Right.
so that, goes back to that whole point of, understanding this, understanding our profiles, how we can advocate, then we can own it. And, it never should be an excuse. If we've got the right things in place,
Yeah.
We might not always be successful the first time. We are going, as humans, failure teaches us a lot of things,
Yeah.
but owning it gives us that opportunity to do exactly what you're talking about. And I could not agree with you more.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Now, as a parent or caregiver, it can be really overwhelming to navigate the journey of supporting an adolescent with dyslexia or ADHD. What advice do you have for parents or caregivers in terms of fostering that resilience that they need, advocating
Mm.
for their child's needs, and promoting their long-term well-being?
Marissa, that's a great question. You know, we all know, as parents, we know this too firsthand. we have to be our child's best advocate,
Yes.
in the beginning. We want to help them develop their own self-advocacy skills. And it's the right thing that as they go through life, they're going to take ownership of that and become their number one advocate. Mm-hmm. But I do think, the biggest challenge that I have seen a lot of times is that parents wait. I think, there's just so much information out there. There's so much that parents are unsure of. And a lot of times, I think kind of the biggest guilt factor I've seen parents experience is like, I wish I had done something sooner.
Sure.
We know as parents, we know our kids better than anybody else does. And so if your instinct is telling you something's not right, or something doesn't feel like it should, don't be afraid to be that squeaky wheel, because in, our system of education, it's that squeaky wheel gets the grease. Yes. And so there are a few things I would definitely suggest to parents. One is, if you think your child might have a learning or attention issue like dyslexia or ADHD, there are some really terrific resources out there that you can access. There are places like the National Center of Learning Disabilities. There are places like Rights Law where you can get access to understanding legally, what your child may be entitled to. The best thing we can do to be that advocate for our kids is be as well informed as we can be. There are some, really great books on things like dyslexia, like people like Marianne Wolf. Mm-hmm. Other people have written. Again, there are some really terrific websites, like the University of Michigan has a really great website on dyslexia. There are resources like understood.org, which has been a tremendous resource. And, so being informed. And then the other piece I would say, it's being that advocate, being informed. And the other piece would be building that community. There are just a number of really great resources out there, whether it's resources like Decoding Dyslexia and those parents who have banded together, or whether it's organizations like CHAD or things that are focused on things like ADHD. There are other parents out there. You are not alone. Mom and dad, this is most important. If you're a mom or dad out there and you're feeling overwhelmed, you're feeling like you're struggling, guess what? You are not alone, and your child is not alone. You are, with something like dyslexia, it's likely about a 1 in 10%, prevalence rate, and same, things like ADHD, all these other learning and attention issues. About 1 in 5 students is struggling with something in this realm. So you are absolutely not alone. And so finding that community out there, taking that healthy risk yourself, being willing to put yourself out there and take that step out publicly, and foregoing that stigma or shame, and linking up with people in your community. You can find them, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's on advocacy groups, whether it's through the web, through like the SEPTAs in your school, the Special Education Parent Teacher Association. There are absolutely communities of people out there who have been through this themselves, who can provide, their own experience, advice. And I think that's an incredible gift that parents should know it does exist out there.
Yes, it does. And in some cases, you find each other. I don't know about you, but in my social groups, my closest friends all have ADHD. We flock birds of a feather, right? It's right. Like, oh, exactly hey. Right. And some of them, it was meeting someone else with a diagnosis for them to realize, well, I checked that box and that one, that sounds like me, but they didn't grow up with a diagnosis or having been diagnosed. So then they go see their doctor, go, I think I have this. The doctor goes, yeah, I think you do, and I mean, it just explains so much to them. And I am sure, since you were diagnosed at a late stage too, once you receive that diagnosis, I am so sure that you all of a sudden had a moment of clarity of just, wow, that makes so much sense.
I did. And I'll share something very personal with you, Marissa. Mm-hmm. It was funny. I'll never forget. I was at a dinner, a work dinner with people from all over. And some of those people knew me very well. And we were laughing, and one of them said, well, because Ben, he has ADHD. And I looked over at her and I said, what? I don't have ADHD. And she's like, how do you not know you have ADHD? And this was years before I got diagnosed. It took me, somebody who works with kids with learning and attention issues, who struggled in school, who was in the resource room, who had trouble with things like word attack and word identification, who needed to go to the writing center, all these kinds of things, whose backpack was a disaster, whose homework was a disaster. And I think people were kind of like, where is this kid going to end up
Sure.
sometimes? In spite of all those experiences, even for me, it was really, really
Yeah.
challenging to really kind of embrace that. And I will tell you, the thing that really was the most difficult for me was that moment of deciding to get tested,
Yeah.
because my biggest fear at that point in my life was, maybe there is nothing, maybe I don't have ADHD.
Right.
Maybe I don't have some type of language processing disorder. Maybe I'm just not that smart.
Yeah.
And that was a hard thing to really, that was a hard hurdle for me to get over. And then once I did, and I got that identification, I breathed this huge sigh of relief, because it also helped me understand why so many things were challenging in my life.
Yeah.
And that, again, we have to take ownership and accountability, but that empowered with that knowledge, how I could make a change in my own life, to live a more fulfilling life and to be even more successful than I already was. So, it's a journey for each and every one of us. But I think the earlier we can clear that path, the earlier we can help our kids trailblaze themselves, and link up with that community and find those pieces and build that strong foundation of advocacy and get those resources in place, the more beautiful and exciting that journey is going to be for them.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Now, one thing about dyslexia, especially to just kind of help parents with that one, because ADHD, it can be behavior based. You can kind of see it in a child. Oh, they're not listening to me. They're hyper focused on something. I can't even pull their attention away. Or they're up out of their seat constantly. My kid can't sit still. This, that, or the other thing. But with dyslexia, it is even more hidden oftentimes than the ADHD. How that manifests in a child. But there's also a common misconception out there that dyslexia is simply reading B's as D's and P's and Q's and vice versa. What are some other ways dyslexia manifests in learners?
Sure. So actually, what's fascinating about that whole reversal piece, is that the reason, all children reverse letters early in school, and it's because of the visual word form area. As a species, we need to be able to do that. So that way we could, from an evolutionary perspective, we could look at the profile of somebody's face and complete that profile. And unfortunately, what happens, or I don't know if it's unfortunate, but because literacy is not an innate skill that we were intended to develop,
Right.
we co-opt that part of the brain, the visual word form area, to actually link the visual letters and then help them link those to the sounds that we make. So that visual word form area is really co-opted as we start to learn to read. So it's pretty typical for all kids to make reversals. And so that can really cloud it. There are some definite things we can look for in terms of early signs of dyslexia. One would be just that ability to identify letters. Forget the reversals, P, D, B, Q. It's all the same visual image, just kind of reversed.
Right.
But, children, young children, not even being able to identify the letters, that's a sign. Things like not being able to rhyme words, that whole notion of, that the whole phonological piece, there are early pieces like that, an interest in hearing stories, but especially as a student starting to learn to read or starting that reading process, not really being interested in kind of the text, making those substitutions or having trouble with retrieval of words. That's another factor. So you'll oftentimes, I'll never forget a young child I was working with who had gone to Hawaii and was trying to describe, this big thing that, was tall and red stuff would spew out of it. Like they couldn't remember the word for volcano. So, that whole piece of trying to, that whole word retrieval piece or misidentifying words, that whole piece of that rapid automatized naming of being able to quickly identify those shapes and objects. There are a number of pieces. And, somebody, especially a child who has had any type of speech and language delay. And when we say speech and language, yes, speech can be articulation, but I think a lot of times people don't understand that, it's that whole piece of speech development, of our ability to, accurately link the sounds, and being able to tease out, early on, before a student learns to read, the ability to discriminate individual sounds and words. Like if I ask a student to say the word stop and then remove the s sound. We would want them to be able to say top. Children who can't do that early on, that's another indicator. Any student or child who's had things like ear issues, or they were offline for a little bit because they needed to have like tubes in their ears, or ear infections, those types of things. All of those things are likely going to lead to some type of possible manifestation of difficulty with the printed word. And so, and then again, a huge factor would be genetics. If since it's hereditary, if a parent has dyslexia, they should really be thinking about that for their child. And there are some really terrific tools out there easy screeners that can be used to really screen these things out early. And so it never hurts to ask. A lot of parents don't realize there are early learning centers in their community. It doesn't hurt to be asked to be screened. And if you can't do that through your public school system, a lot of independent schools like the Southport School, I wish there were enough for everybody.
Yes.
But many times, if you're worried, it can't hurt to call an organization like an independent school for students with learning and attention issues, because a lot of times they might be able to help you screen, or might be able to refer you to somebody who can do a simple screening to see if a child is at risk.
Excellent. Those are all great resources and great tips for what to look for in children that, especially if you're worried that they may have dyslexia or ADHD. Thank you. Are there any helpful resources for parents or caregivers you would like to share as we near the close of the podcast today?
Well, I will say, I'd like to share a couple of things really quickly. One would be for teachers. There are some really great teaching resources, and I'm going to point people to the Florida Center of Reading Research.
Yes.
That's a terrific resource. They have a lot of free manipulatives, things teachers can download, activities. And then both for teachers and parents, there are some really terrific tools and insights on something called the National Center for Improving Literacy, NCIL. That's a federally funded project. And if you go on there, you can get information as a parent or as a teacher, anything from, what are the dyslexia laws in your state, to, what are tools, resources that you can use. When you go on that website, you can, identify whether you're a parent or a teacher, and there's different tools for you. There's things like infographics that might be very helpful for, having those conversations with people. Understood.org is another terrific resource we talked about. The National Center on NCLD, National Center on Learning Disabilities, another great resource. They offer a lot of statistics, a lot of facts. And then I would point people again to rightslaw.com. Pete and his wife have done just a terrific job over the years, providing an incredible amount of information and free resources on there that parents can use to help be empowered to go speak to the teachers in their community, or work through the IEP or 504 process. As parents, there's a lot on our plates, and these things they feel very daunting. And, in certain circumstances, it's really important to get somebody like an advocate or a special ed attorney involved. But as you begin that journey, again, being empowered with knowledge, and Rights Law is just a great resource for that.
Awesome. That is so great to hear. And one final thought here for parents, our listeners out there, you're seeing and hearing about very successful people who have been diagnosed with ADHD and or dyslexia. It's going to be okay. Your child will be successful. A diagnosis just helps.
That's right. Information is power.
It is. Dr. Benjamin Powers, it was an absolute pleasure having you on The Buzz today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Marissa, thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm so impressed by the great work you're doing to help educate, inform, and empower people, through this journey. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. If you enjoyed our discussion today, please like Firefly Tutors on all your social media hubs like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Find us on Pinterest, where we pin all of our favorite resources for parents and tutors. At Firefly Tutors, we believe every student deserves the opportunity to develop to their highest potential. See you next time on The Buzz.